artists that sing the Christmas blues. Join me, Gene Bailey, for Blues Time in the City, this weekend before Christmas, right here.
This is comedian Janelle Banks, and you are listening to KUAW, Kansas City.
KUAW listeners, this is Carl Boyd for Wade Your Grades.
I'm ready when you are. The champ is here! The champ is here! Okay. Let me share it. Then I'm going to get over.
KUAW listeners, this is Carl Boyd for Wade Your Grades.
We live, we ready to go? All right. Microphone check.
Let me share it.
1, 2, what is this? This is Shifting Paradigms with the Consciousness Business. B. Michael here. Shifting Paradigms on KUAW Radio, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio. We're here live on Monday, March 15th, 2021. Got some strange weather patterns going on in the Kansas City area. Prayerfully, everybody's safe and sound. I'd like to welcome everybody to Shifting Paradigms. Again, I'm your host, B. Michael. We're here to do it again. Got a solo dolo show today. We're going to be dealing with a show called Biotechnology Paradigmatics. We'll get into what that is all about. But I want to thank always the Black Family Technology Awareness Association for holding this down, keeping it up, particularly Baba G, George Walker for doing what he does on the soundboard, holding it down and keeping it up always, staying true to this particular effort. Also to all the different hosts for KUAW, want to give a shout out to all the hosts that we have, all the great shows and all the dynamics that are going on. And of course, Shifting Paradigms is a show that's all about stimulating critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with self-determination. And so with that, today we're talking about, again, biotechnology paradigmatics. That's right. It's a very profound thought that we want to uncover and unwind. But we're going to wrap this up, hopefully in this hour, and just bring out some thought patterns for us to understand on how to really maximize our potential as humans, but also how to counter some of our glitches and some of our viral types of actions and thoughts and words that trip us up. We want to make sure that we're getting to a place where we're properly functioning as human beings, and it's so interesting when you look at that word Homo sapien or human being. Homo sapien means a wise man. Humanity as wise. Homo, of course, meaning humanity. Sapient, sapiens coming from the word sapient, which means to be clear, to be wise. And so today we're going to talk about how this is into it. Dedicate this show to all mothers and fathers, because those are the frameworks from which all humans come from. Without the mother or the father, we would not have the human family. And so the mother and the father, the seed and the sperm and the ovum, the egg, are essential in the production of this line of technology that truly is the most exquisite and profound technology in creation. More than any computer, more than any artificial intelligence, we have to understand the power of organic intelligence. And so that's what today's show is all about. I want to kind of contextualize this with Psalm 139, to open up with Psalm 139. And this is verses 13 through 18. It says, "For you, Yah, possessed my kidneys. You have covered me in my mother's womb. I give thanks to you, for I am awesomely and wondrously made. I am awesomely and wondrously made. Wondrous are your works, and my being knows it well. My bones were not concealed from you when I was shaped in a hidden place, knit together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body, and in your book, all of them were written, the days they were formed, while none was among them. And how precious are your thoughts to me, O El. How great has been the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more than the sand. When I wake up, I am still with you. And it's so powerful because when you really think about this, there's a notion that I share with my sons. And I asked them, what did you know before you were born? And they had to think about it. Said, I don't know. Everything? I'm like, exactly. You knew everything before you were born, because if you think about it, your sperm swam, you as the sperm, you swam to find your body. You had to go into that egg, find your body, impregnate it, right? Fertilize that egg, and then go through your gestational process. You had to go through three trimesters to get to your full development. And you had to follow those instructions to divide in your cellular structure to arrive at this magnificent piece of art, or this magnificent piece of technology called the body, with all of the different systems, from the digestive to the endocrine to the immune to the central nervous, right, to the reproductive, all of these different systems functioning and operating together as one unit. That's technology. The eyes alone contain a technology far superior than any camera can ever replicate, okay? And so when we look at our body and we understand it as technology, we can see how this usage can be so far reaching. And again, this is what it comes down to when it says, I am awesomely and wondrously made. And what this is really pointing at is that we are a reflection of the Creator itself, who is all knowing, who is all powerful, right? Who is all present. And we have that in the form of consciousness when we truly tap into that. And so again, I want to really just hit this to everyone, and please feel free to call in, if there is a call in. You can actually just type a comment, rather, because we're not in the studio, so it's not a live call-in show today, I don't believe. But do call in and feel free to share your thoughts, your comments. Don't call in, make comments, and we'll get that going. I got a few articles, though, because I don't want to just present this as like arbitrary information. This is an article from Forbes magazine. This was written July 24th, 2018 by Julian Vigo, a former contributor. It's a 2-year-old article, again, 2018. It's called The Human Body as Technology, from Forbes. He refers to a philosopher, Jacques Descartes. He says in Discourse on Method, 1637, Descartes elaborates a theory of humans' corporality through machines, whereby his theory of the animal body as machine sets into motion early ideas of how human bodies can be, at the very least, likened to the machine. Fast forward to less than 300 years later, and Frederick Winslow Taylor introduced the world to his principles of scientific management, today characterized as Taylorism. Taylorism is a scientific system born in the United States and developed during the 1890s. And Taylorism consists of two parts. First, the horizontal division, which attempted to cut tasks down to the most simple individualized movements entrusted to each specialized worker. To discover how horizontal divisions of labor would be achieved, there were engineers who observed and measured each other in movement, seeking to eliminate unnecessary time loss while understanding the methods to achieve each movement in each stage of production. Second, the vertical division. So the first was the horizontal, now is the vertical division, which corresponded to a strict distinction between work conception and then its execution, whereby the engineers would conceive of the labor and the workmen would perform it in accordance with the instructions and training they were handed. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the book of Psalms, when it says, in your book, all of them were written, the days they were formed, while none was among them. So this was the idea. This was the inception of the idea that gave the instructions for the labor to be executed. And this is what the Most High had done. Your eyes saw my unformed body, and in your book, all of them were written. This is what that vertical trajectory is about. Okay, the vertical division, which corresponds to a strict distinction between work conception and then its execution, whereby the engineers would conceive of the labor and the workmen would perform it in accordance with the instructions and training that they were handed. Within his theory of scientific management, Taylor attributes rationality, which is the hallmark of human consciousness. No other creature on earth has rationality but Homo sapiens. But Taylor attributes rationality to the workers and irrationality to the managers, such that Taylor saw the bodies as carriers of information from which management was to capitalize on, albeit while being paid far more than the workers. Taylorism depends upon the following principles: the separation of the discourse of work from its execution, that management should appropriate all traditional knowledge from the workers, that work should be divided into the most minimal movements to reduce the number of workers, and that the workers' actions are not voluntary, but they are part of a choreography orchestrated by management. And so this is about order. This is about even hierarchy. This is about a transmission of consciousness from one element to another. And we see this in the working of our human bodies. Okay, I'm just going to skip down. We got that kind of taken into account here. But let's look at what this is really about. Okay, so in the workplace, most people today experience surveillance from what they do on their computers to the tasks performed. Even with the liberation of many workers from the stuffy office environments, they are welcomed into a seemingly laid-back startup, which requires all workers to use their workflow management system for every task that must be logged throughout the day. Work telephones are also being monitored for performance, as is marketing automation, which is ostensibly built to intuitively solve to keep workers aligned to more automated tasks rather than the natural. In the US, 43% of companies monitor email, and of these companies, 73% use technology tools to automatically monitor email and 40% to assign individuals to manually read and review email, and the number of corporations monitoring its employees is at 80%. Okay, so this monitoring is about the accountability that is present given the actions that are carried out. So where machines was for Descartes a theory of machines, it is also presupposed a spontaneous invention which science and society consciously and explicitly promoted. From there to Taylorism to today's hyper-management, where responses to questions in electronic surveillance are forms of organizing the body, a machine, we must wonder if this is any better for productivity than for our collective society and mental health. Where Michael Foucault once stated that the body at work allowed for the possibility of the techniques of power to realize individual subjectivities, we must be careful to not be consumed by all the mechanisms of power. And so this is just comparing it to the working of an organization, okay? The organism is very akin to the organization. In fact, when you look at nature, most of artificial inventions come from an organic matrix, okay? It comes from an organic archetype even. And so when we see how nature works, we can then understand how machines work, how things that are created work. But everything is based on nature in its purest form and principle, okay? And so when we understand how the body as an organism functions much like an organization, because all these systems are working together, all these little different workers that we have in our body can be compared to a machine. And this machine of the body, when in optimum condition, functions at a high capacity. And of course, we know we only use up to about 5, maybe 6% of our brain power, our brain capacity. So imagine the reach of our potential if we tap into more of that. And we know how to do that, okay? And you can be assured that the powers that be, which there's an article we're going to read today or get into, know this, okay? So let's get to this a little deeper. Let's look at consciousness, because we just talked about that. This is the brain's Wi-Fi system. We're all familiar with Wi-Fi, which is wide fidelity, right? So this is talking about wide fidelity. And of course, this is talking about the connection to a source that allows information to flow through the system. Well, consciousness is the organic equivalent to that. And actually, I would say the origin of that, because before technology, like, artificial intelligence was at our fingertips, we use organic intelligence. And what's so powerful about it is that you have something called extrasensory perceptions that do exist, that people have capacities to actually tap into and use telepathy, right? To be able to transmit thoughts to other people's minds, to be able to read people's minds. You have the ability to be clairvoyant. You have the ability to see things clearly and to understand how things are unfolding. You have the ability of telekinesis, and that is moving things with the mind, okay? So there's a lot of different powers that we have that are latent within our technology, that if we truly set aside the time to develop these powers in this technology and to know how this technology works, we would be able to transcend many of our human limitations, okay? And this is what the scriptures most wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions speak of, because this is talking about everything is encoded about unwrapping and unpackaging and deciphering the mystery of the body. Because when we think about it, people climb mountains, people scuba dive into the deepest parts of the ocean that they can go. People, drive cars as fast as they can go. They go to space. They do all kinds of amazing things, physically, to conquer the external. But few people are really about conquering the internal. And this is what this is really coming down to. When we understand the biotechnology paradigmatics, this is about mastering self in order to use the technology that is latent within us for good, okay? And the source of that is consciousness, because that is truly what we are. We're not this physical body. This is just the machine that allows for the codes to be carried out. This is just a vehicle, a vessel, right? This is just the computer. This is just the physical computer that carries out all of the codes, all the instructions, okay? Which come from the consciousness between your ears, right? That gray matter. Because the brain itself is just the vessel. The mind is what everything is. And that's one of the Hermetic laws. Everything is mental. Everything is vibration, okay? But consciousness, the brain's Wi-Fi system, comes to us from psychology today. This is an article written by an Ezekiel Morcella, a PhD. He says that consciousness is the brain's Wi-Fi system. He says one is conscious of things like pain, yellow after images, and the urge to breathe when holding one's breath, but one is seldom conscious of the actions of the stomach or of one's pupils. You don't see what your stomach is doing when it's digesting food. You don't see what your eyes, your pupils are doing when they're focusing on objects. Like motor programs and low-level perceptual processing, the latter are unconscious. It's just a part of the central nervous system. And what they would call the reptilian brain, which deals with autonomic brain body functions, okay? Science is beginning to understand the nature and function of consciousness, conscious awareness, like never before. And this was an article written in 2009, by the way. For example, we know while we are seldom aware of the complicated actions of the digestive tract or the pupils, which dilate or constrict depending on light conditions. These actions are very visible in someone with light-colored eyes. In contrast, we are almost always aware of the urge to breathe when holding our breath underwater, or our urge to drop a hot dish that we are carrying from the kitchen to the dinner table. Figuratively speaking, the skeletal muscle system is like a big steering wheel that different parts of the brain are trying to control at the same time. So our skeletal system is like a steering wheel system, okay? When these different systems are in conflict, as when one voluntarily holds one's breath, and part of us wants to inhale, and another part of us does not want to inhale, we have a strong conscious experience. Consciousness is the way the different regions communicate with each other. Okay, and this is what that messenger, the vertical and the horizontal, are all talking about, the vertical division and the horizontal division. This is about how things are communicated and relayed to these different systems in order to enact productivity. Okay, without consciousness, there would be no crosstalk between the different systems, and one would inhale reflexively. One does not need consciousness to withdraw from a painful stimulus, but one does need it in order to keep touching it. For current media coverage on this research, you can say click here for. Another way to think about it is as follows. There are many quasi-independent computers in the brain. There are many computers in the brain, he's saying, right? And each can do complicated things and influence overt action, which we can think of as influencing the actions of a printer, okay? And what happens a lot is that when we're not aware of how these different independent computers function, they can get completely hacked. They can get reprogrammed. They can get manipulated. They can get viruses in them, right? And then when you get these triggers, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and you get these reactions that you don't even know where these reactions are coming from, well, it's because your technology has been compromised. It has been affected, right? And it may be from decisions that you've made. It may be from experiences that you've had beyond anything that you could control. And so there's many different factors that go into how this technology functions as a human body. Each computer can influence the printer, but in order for two computers to interact and then influence the printer, you need a Wi-Fi system. Okay, so this is what this is all about. You need a system that allows for these connections to take place. Consistent with the integration consensus, stating that consciousness integrates information or processes that would be independent otherwise. In this way, consciousness functions as a Wi-Fi system to integrate the different processes in the brain and yield adaptive action. That is what consciousness is about. It's about the integration of information. It is about making the connections to the systems in order for action to be produced. And the more conscious that we are, the more we can connect to the source of this Wi-Fi, the greater will be our productivity and our reach. And so this is something that is known. This is well known. This is an article, actually, excuse me, this is a declassified document from the CIA, CIA.gov. This is approved for release. I'm gonna read the heading of this. Approved for release 2003 of the 9th month, 10th day of the year. Okay. CIA, Department of the Army, U.S. Army Operational Group, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command at Fort George G. Meade, Maryland. This was actually printed on June 9th of 1983, but it was just released 20 years later in September of 2003. It was written June 9th of 1983, but it was released, approved for release 20 years later. So they had this knowledge on tap for 20 years prior to its release. So imagine of the insights and the development and the awareness that the U.S. Army Intelligence has. And there's a movie, I started watching it. I've seen it a while ago, but I started watching it a little while ago. I didn't finish it, but Men Who Stare at Goats. There's a movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats. It's based on a true story. George Clooney is one of the stars of the movie. And it was based on a Army division that was training soldiers to kill their opponents with their mind. In fact, when you read scripture, it talks about the moment that Moses killed the Egyptian. A lot of people think that it was a physical thing. Well, in the Hebrew, it talks about when Moses looked here and there to see, and then he smote the Egyptian. It was because he found the right words in the energy, the right letters to compose, the right words to pronounce death on this Egyptian, because we know the scripture says the power of life and death is in the tongue, and those who love it eat the fruit thereof. So there's a lot of principles that are pregnant in scripture that is giving us the understanding, if we were to seek out this understanding and to acquire this knowledge and apply this knowledge with wisdom, to allow us to master this technology. But the name of this article is called The Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. Okay. The article was written by, it doesn't even say who wrote the article, but this is again, it's from Wayne McDonald. He has a couple points that he wants to make. He says, you tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult process. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had the recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics, which is spiritual matters, in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of human consciousness. Here we go again, that Wi-Fi, right? I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving Gateway's objectives. We can transcend the time-space dimension if the human consciousness is expanded. That's what technology does. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics, something that we can just use as a reference to capture the metaphysical, okay? And this is why I say spirituality is nothing less than sacred science. That's all spirituality is. It is sacred science. So if we're just learning these literal cliches in our spiritual house of worship, we're not getting the fullness of what is being instructed, because the fullness of what is being instructed is how to master this particular technology and use it for the sake of the kingdom and to manifest the kingdom, which is an entirely different reality that we've spoken of as well. But it is I would say it is a projection of consciousness, because even Elon Musk has said all reality is a simulated reality. It's a simulated experience. It's simulation, okay? It is a projection. It is like a video game where social engineers are designing the reality in which we live, but it's based on the consciousness of the people. And this is what is being manipulated in order to degrade the consciousness, not to elevate it, not to go to 2.0, 3.0, but we want to keep you at a functional level as a beast so that you don't know how to tap into this consciousness and understand how your body is technology. But finally, he says, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomena of the out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it in a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. This is from the U.S. Army, people, okay? Now, he began the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation, so that their objectives and mode of functioning could be compared in the reader's mind with the Gateway experience as the model of its underlying mechanics was developed. Additionally, that introductory material is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicate that at times these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the Gateway experience, which is transcending time and space. That's what the Gateway experience is all about, okay? Then he goes on to say, Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, you're not thinking. You're merely being logical. You're not thinking. You're only being logical, right? We have to go beyond the logical sometimes into a realm of critical thought. The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualizations that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. There's an article or some videos on my blog, shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com, that talks about prophetic consciousness, which is a fusion of both hemispheres typically, but it is based on the the imaginative capacity of the mind influencing the intellectual. They're really like working in tandem together. But that is where the artist and the scientist fuse. And this is what spirituality is all about. It's a sacred science again, okay? It's the art and science of spiritual transmission, okay? So to borrow Dr. Bohr's mode of expression, parts of this paper will require not only logic, but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve a complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. This is faith. Faith is the evidence of what is unseen and the substance of what is hoped for. But there is substantial evidence that is present in the world of faith. When we understand that, it becomes less of superstitious belief and it becomes, in fact, empirically based on evidence, on substantial evidence, okay? So let me go down to one of these things, hypnosis, okay? This is a very interesting part right here. He says, according to theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Itzhak Bentov, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex. So they're knowing how hypnosis works. It is direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers and lower cerebral or emotional portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain following successful disengagement of the stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. So now we're talking about the limbic and the reptilian brain. We're not talking about the neocortex where consciousness is, because what they're doing through hypnosis is capturing your sensomotor cortex and your pleasure centers, okay? They're appealing to those particular portions of your brain, okay? The left hemisphere of the brain is a self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allowing passage to the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere, which functions as the non-critical, holistic, non-verbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom or through reduction to a soporific semi-sleep state, external stimuli to include hypnotic suggestions are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere where they are accepted and acted upon directly. So let's say you're watching television and you just are in these beta waves of your brain now, because that's what the television effects are, the beta waves, which gives you into a more sleep-like state. You're watching television, you're in the show, but here it is. Let's say your loved one is calling you, baby, 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 but here you are tuned in. You don't even hear them because you're hypnotized now. You don't even know that, but you're hypnotized. That's a state of subtle hypnosis because you're so tuned in, you've been distracted by your left hemisphere that you can't even logically think because you're so now into this world of imagination that all the suggestions that are coming to you, guess what, are being planted into your brain. You're being programmed. Your technology, your brain, your mind is being programmed. So that's why they call it television programming, because it's not the order of the shows that comes on the television that's doing the programming. It's what it's doing to you and me. That's the program. But are we understanding this? Because this is how propaganda works. This is what Edward Bernays knew when he dealt with propaganda and he dealt with marketing and he dealt with television. He knew this. Continuing on. The result may involve an emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, which is the reptilian brain. Okay, that's where the serpent mind is. Okay, that's where the serpent comes from in the scriptures. So there's not a literal serpent that was in the garden. KUAW, as I know her, or Eve, was dealing with her own thoughts. She was dealing with herself. Because it was good to the eye, it was good for food, and it was about to make her wise. So that's where her technology got compromised. The virus came in because it was these pleasure centers that she allowed to get tapped into. And she got hypnotized and entered into a lower state of consciousness. Continuing on. Both the sensory and the motor cortices of the right cerebral portion of the brain contain a sequence of points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to points in the body. Stimulation of the corresponding area on the cortex causes intermediate response in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, induction of the suggestion that the left leg is numb, if it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged and is referred to the appropriate area of the sensory cortex, will result in an electrical reaction being generated that will induce the feeling of numbness. The mind controls this. Similarly, the suggestion that the person is experiencing a general feeling of happiness and well-being would be referred to the appropriate pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral portion or in the cortex of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as one that informs a hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration or powers of memory would be responded to in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity normally held in reserve as a result of the left hemisphere selection and control process. This aspect will become significant in the context of the gateway process when attention is given to examining the way that hypnosis may be used to accelerate progress in the early stages of the gateway experience. Listening to KUAW here, Michael. We're talking about biotechnology paradigmatics. The body is human technology. We're just talking about hypnosis and the mind consciousness and how, if not guarded, when we watch television, we have the capacity to be hypnotized and to take the suggestions that the program is running on us to carry out. So let's take the individual known as Charles Manson. Charles Manson said that when he listened to the White Album by the Beatles, he heard about a race war. So he ended up carrying out all his horrific crimes because the music reached a part of his brain that carried out a message, an instruction, a code that his technology had no choice but to carry out. And he had other followers as well. Or let's say you're just watching television and a commercial comes on and now all of a sudden you're hungry. You want to go get a burger because the images that come through the television and the sounds and the words and the flashing of lights and all this stuff, it is impacting your pleasure centers and it's cutting off your left hemisphere, but it is waking up your right hemisphere and allowing you to take all the suggestions, which is all the power that they need to carry out the will of this particular matter. Okay. So now, on the flip side of that, you have transcendental meditation, which is an internal aspect of it, which works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense and protracted single-minded concentration on the process of drawing energy up the spinal cord, resurrection. This is what the resurrection is about, okay? Because this energy, known as chi or spirit, okay, life force energy, is the source of life. That's where your consciousness really comes from, okay? But this process of drawing energy up the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. As a result, According to Bentov, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the context in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus, starting from the toes and on up. The Bentov biomedical model, as described in a book by Lee Sanella, MD, entitled Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence. So the Kundalini is just the representation of a serpent, but that is your central nervous system. In fact, when you look at the serpent and the Uraeus of the ancient Kemetic people, you see that you have this cobra with this hood expanded, but that is the expansion of consciousness. That's what that represents. In fact, even in the scripture, when you look at the seraph or the bronze serpent in the wilderness that the people looked up to when they were healed from the venom of these fiery serpents, of the Nachash, the fiery serpents, the whisperer, right? The enchanter, the hypnotic one. But when they looked up to the seraph, the brazen serpent, they were healed. Okay, but that's all dealing with this Kundalini energy, this consciousness. This is what this is about, the elevation of consciousness, because they had to look up, which is a symbolic representation of the ascent, the ascent of this energy up the spinal cord. Okay, so this states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of the altered rhythm of heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation, in which set up sympathetic vibrations in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities, which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain. Now, these fluids are very important because the scriptures talk about milk and honey, but this milk and honey is nothing more than the secretions of the pineal and pituitary gland, respective. Milk, the pituitary gland, which produces all of our reproductive juices, if you will, or secretions. And then the pineal produces the golden essence, the electromagnetic. Okay, so these are electromagnetic, which when goes down to the solar plexus creates that immaculate conception, this birth child, this the Mashiach, if you will, the anointing. But what has to happen is for it to cross over the crucifixion, to cross over the ganglia into its origins, and that's the resurrection. This is what this ascent of energy up the spinal cord is talking about. That's the resurrection. So when we have to understand how this technology works, we can think about it in some, mystical way. Yes, it is mystical because it is a hidden reality. But when we tap into what this is really suggesting and pointing to as relates to our body, then we can see how this all unfolds and how we master this and become the anointing ones ourselves, the anointed ones, okay? So in addition to Bentov, the stages of bliss described by those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed the full loop along the hemispheres may be explained as a self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain caused by the circulation of a current energy along the sensory cortex. Bentov also notes that most of the described symptoms start on the left side of the body, means that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere, the imaginative side of the brain. Although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or some is required to bring up the Kundalini. So this is a dedication you have to do. This is a consecration. This is a devotion to this elevation of consciousness and to the mastery of this. And we all have the capacity to do this. This is what's so powerful about this technology. You have the capacity to fulfill this. And it's so important that we understand this, because where we are right now in human history is at a crossroad. And what we're seeing with the coronavirus and we're seeing with all these different resets, if you will, is that humanity is on the brink of an evolutionary scale. Okay, this means we're looking at a new presentation of human beings. And this is now, I am suggesting, going from the earthly man, Homo terrestrial, to Homo celestial, to the heavenly man, or the heavenly human. And this is what this is about, because vibration, as a matter of fact, there's something called the Schumann resonance, which is the heartbeat of the earth. It is accelerating. The earth is technology as well, okay? and the heartbeat of the earth is accelerating, that means there is a higher vibration that is accompanying, and any and everyone whose vibration is aligning with this is also elevating. And this is where we have to get to in order to make this transition that is right before us. And we all know there's something coming. All we got to do is look outside or turn the news on. But if you go within, that's where you get everything. That's where all the answers are. That's where the technology is unlocked. And that's where you get the fullness of consciousness, which gives you the fullest reach of your human potential. Let's go on. Again, he's talking about normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years, or some is required to bring up the Kundalini. Bentov states that exposure to mechanical or acoustical vibrations in the range of 4 to 7 hertz or cycles per second for protracted periods may achieve the same effect. So this is why you just turn on YouTube and they got these, 487 hertz or the God vibration. They got all these things for healing of the body because sound is what does this. It's vibration, okay? Bentov cites as an example, repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produce the range of vibrations, or being exposed for long periods of time to these frequencies caused, for instance, by an air conditioning duct. He also notes that the cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous physio-kundalini sequence in susceptible people who have a particularly sensitive nervous system. So let me tell you about my kundalini experience. I was doing some breathing exercises at one point in time, and I was with Candace Benton, one of my children's mother, and we were doing some breathing exercises, and deep breathing, as a matter of fact. And so I sit down afterwards, and we just, having a conversation, but we get up, and I got up pretty fast, but all of a sudden my whole head just gets light. And knowing me to be a silly person, she's thinking I'm being goofy and playing, but walking to a back room, and all of a sudden I just collapse and give out. I mean, things went dark and everything, and I just collapsed. I wasn't unconscious, but I was just weak. I climbed up, and all of a sudden I'm just like on my fours, and my body just starts tingling. It's just resonating from the head all the way down to my toes. And I realized that was Kundalini, because it wasn't like it was a painful experience. It was, in fact, pleasurable, but it was just intense. And it was just a resonance that was just going through my body. And I was just like, what in the world? But that was a Kundalini experience, because it started at the crown of my head, and I felt it go down my spine and then out into my arms, down into my legs, ultimately into my toes. And that was what the nervous system does, because that's what is our source of consciousness. It is that nervous system, because again, that is what we are: the sperm, head, which is our brain, and the tail, which is our spine, and then all the nerves come from that give us our motion, our volition, our consciousness. And so it's powerful for us to understand this. And meditation is what activates that and what gives us control over that particular system, which controls all the other systems in our body. And so when we take that into account, we can really see how all of this is to work. This article is very powerful. This will be on my blog. You can go to shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com, and you can really get some more information here. His conclusion is there is sound rational basis in terms of physical science parameters for considering Gateway to be plausible in terms of its essential objectives. Intuitional insights of not only personal but of practical and professional nature would seem to be within bounds of reasonable expectations. However, a phased approach for entering the Gateway experience in an accelerated mode would seem to be required if the time needed to reach advanced states of altered consciousness is to be brought within more manageable limits from the standpoint of establishing an organization-wide exploitation of Gateway's potential. They're using this for warfare, though. The most promising approach suggested in the foregoing study involves the following steps. A, begin by using Gateway's hemi-sync tapes to achieve enhanced brain focus and induce hemispheric synchronization. B, then add strong REM sleep frequencies to induce left brain quiescence and deep physical relaxation. Relaxation is so crucial to this. You have to be able to relax. That's one of the principles of Tai Chi. to relax. Speaking of which, join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 6 a.m., Long Life Holistic Services on Facebook. EYE, B Michael on Instagram. You can check me out. We're doing mind over matter morning movement. We're doing a lot of stretching, some calisthenics, and also some breathing exercises, qigong, energy cultivation, to get this technology truly enhanced and brought into a fullness as well. Join me every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 a.m. Continuing on. Provide hypnotic suggestion designed to enable an individual to induce deep auto-hypnotic state at will. Use auto-hypnotic suggestion to attain much enhanced focus of concentration and motivation in rapidly progressing through Focus 12 exercises. E then repeat steps A and B following use of the auto-hypnotic suggestion that an out-of-body movement will occur and be remembered. So all these things that we're doing here is talking about utilizing this technology to its highest capacity. Now, let's close out with this here. 5 techniques to heal your emotional triggers. We're going to close out with this because these triggers are what short circuits our consciousness, okay? These are wounds that need to heal. And a lot of times it's like a virus that we get in our system that we need to defrag and just clean out, okay? What are emotional triggers as Judith Orloff, medical doctor on Psychology Today? They are those super reactive places inside you that become activated by someone else's behaviors or comments. When triggered, you may either withdraw emotionally or simply feel hurt or angry or respond in an aggressive way that you will probably regret later. Your reaction is so intense because you're defending against a painful feeling that has surfaced. For instance, if a coworker says you're not smart enough to apply for that great job, or a relative says you're too old to find a mate, you become triggered. You get upset, you doubt yourself, you feel inferior, or even wrongly think that you're over the hill. There is no hill to be over. Keep that in mind. On the other hand, if you thought that's ridiculous, of course I'm qualified for the job, but no matter my age, I can find a wonderful mate, you're not in a triggered state because you recognize your true worth. Your emotional triggers are wounds that need to heal. These beliefs are based on fears. They're not reality. You don't want to be frequently triggered. It's exhausting and painful, especially for highly sensitive and empathetic people. To heal emotional triggers, begin to compassionately examine and shift any beliefs that you've carried around from your family or society, such as I'm not smart enough, I'm too sensitive, on and on. You need to gently address the parts of yourself that feel flawed or have self-doubts about your body image or your worthiness to find a partner. When you heal the initial trauma or false belief, you set yourself emotionally free. Then you won't become as easily triggered or drained. Use these strategies to start healing your emotional triggers so that your consciousness can expand. Be aware. In your journal, identify your top 3 emotional triggers, which cause you to be most upset and thrown off balance, okay? 2, track the trigger's origin. Journal about where these triggers originated, okay? Very important. Knowing where your triggers come from allows you to know yourself better. 3, reprogram negative beliefs. Do your transcendental meditations. Start with one trigger that has the least emotional charge and begin to compassionately reprogram it. Tell yourself this is not reality. What actually true is I'm lovable, capable, and smart. Substitute the negative belief with a positive, more realistic one. 4, act as if. At the start of the healing process, you might need to act as if when you haven't fully integrated a new positive belief. So that means act as if this is the reality, right? Change your behavior. That's okay. For instance, simply saying to someone, I disagree. I fully deserve this great job, right? Change the narrative, right? Redefine your reality. Paves the way for a deeper belief later on, okay? Sometimes you need to practice a more enlightened behavior for it to sink in and become real. And then lastly, work with a therapist or a coach. It's often useful to seek guidance to help you find the root of the trigger and process the feelings involved. You may feel tremendous rage or sadness that your family never believed in you, so you never learned to believe in yourself. Expressing and releasing the feelings allows you to heal the trigger and move on to embrace your true power. So this is just a synopsis of this right here. There's so much that we can go into, but we're going to wrap this up because it's so important to understand how the body truly functions. In fact, I want to close with a passage from 1 John 2 and verses 20 and 21. It says, and you have an anointing from the set apart one, from the Holy One. And you know all. You already know all. You came into this world truly knowing all, but at birth we forget it. But in that consciousness and the reserves of our mind, we're able to access all this information and transcend the time-space dimension and access this to allow this technology to become optimal. He says, I did not write to you because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no falsehood is of the truth. And with that, this is B. Michael. We're going to be signing off here. This was Biotechnology Paradigmatics on Shifting Paradigms. Tune in again in 2 weeks. We'll have another show going on. But join me if you can, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here on Facebook, Long Life Holistic Services from 6 a.m. to 6:30, just a 30-minute little power workout. We'll get into some stretching, some breathing techniques and calisthenics, and we keep it moving from there. 2 weeks, I'll be back, Shifting Paradigms. This is KUAW here, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio. We're signing off. Have a great evening. Peace and power. Peace and blessings.
All right, you're listening to KUAW.